There was a moment when carrying a Coach bag felt embarrassing. Not just unfashionable, but embarrassing. You know the era, outlet malls were everywhere, there were perpetual discounts, and that infamous Coach logo was stamped on everything. Coach was the brand your mom loved, but not in a cool way. Fast forward to today, Coach is one of the hottest brands with Gen Z. Demand is exploding, bags are selling out, and younger consumers are finally proud to wear it again. This episode is about how all of that happened. I'm Sammi Cohen, and this is Social Currency, a podcast that unpacks the stories that are shaping business, culture, and the intersection of the two. This Coach comeback was the result of a long series of deliberate choices that required patience, restraint, and a willingness to endure short-term pain for long-term clarity. And at the end of this episode, I'll share the core takeaway that explains why this turnaround worked when so many others fail. And if you love a good retail comeback story, buckle up, because this, in my opinion, is one of the best ones of the decade. So to understand the comeback, you'll first have to understand what Coach originally stood for. Coach was founded back in 1941 as a leather workshop. It wasn't born as a fashion brand in the modern sense. The early value proposition centered on craftsmanship with an emphasis on soft leather, thoughtful construction, and utility. For decades, Coach represented a quiet kind of confidence. The bags were understated and durable. You bought one because it worked well and it aged well. It was American luxury before that phrase had any meaning. Then, as we very much know, the brand found tremendous scale over time. In the 90s and early 2000s, handbags became major status symbols in the US and all around North America. And Coach leaned very hard into that shift. Logos became more visible, distribution expanded rapidly, and this time period was the peak of mall culture. Coach stores appeared all across the country. And the growth was very real. In the year 2000, Coach generated just over $500 million in revenue. A decade later, in 2010, that figure had climbed past $3.6 billion. From the outside, it looked like a textbook success story. But on the inside of the business, the foundation was starting to weaken. With any consumer luxury company, keeping the luxury intact requires an obsessive dedication to making the product feel aspirational, well-made, and special. Coach completely lost that dedication. As their distribution widened, pricing discipline faded. Discounting the products became routine rather than occasional. The outlet stores shifted from a controlled channel into a primary profit engine. Over time, customers learned that waiting almost always paid off because they could just get the same bag or product for significantly cheaper if they just waited 6 months. That behavioral shift mattered more than any single design decision. And with retail, discounting doesn't just affect margins, it also reshapes consumer psychology. Once consumers expected a lower price later, the brand loses all authority. The customer, not the brand, starts setting the terms. And this creates a quiet but damaging dynamic because full price buyers feel foolish and loyal customers feel penalized for acting early. What makes this especially dangerous is that the numbers can still look fine in the short term. Promotions drive spikes in revenue, but the long-term cost shows up later when it becomes nearly impossible to convince people that something is worth paying full price for again. Coach didn't just lose margin during this period, they lost credibility, and the credibility is what takes years to rebuild. And something really important that I want to call out here was that Coach did not fail overnight. That's what makes the story so important because this applies to so many other brands that have lost market share and relevance. Their revenue continued to grow long after the brand had actually lost their clarity. The distribution masked fatigue, the short-term growth that they saw just delayed the reckoning. And internally, the company was focusing on the wrong problem. The assumption was that their relevance had faded, so the solution had to be more noise and louder logos. And that instinct is common, but it's the wrong move. Clearly, Coach wasn't unknown, so awareness wasn't the issue. The meaning behind the brand was the real issue. So by the mid-2010s, it became clear that more volume would not fix the problem. And so in 2013, Coach made the decision to hire Stuart Vevers as a creative director. Now, Stuart has a tremendous career, and his career spanned major luxury houses, and he had so much experience guiding heritage brands back to relevance. His assessment when he came into Coach was very direct. The Coach products, in his opinion, lacked personality, and the brand had lost its emotional pull. Customers no longer had a reason to care about Coach. Weavers also understood that design alone would not save the brand. The business model had to change first, and this meant that they needed to rethink distribution, reducing reliance on their promotions, and accepting short-term discomfort in exchange for long-term clarity. Coach leadership agreed with this assessment, and they knew that they were in for a bumpy road ahead. The next phase of Coach is where most brand turnarounds fail. When a company has depended on promotions for years, entire teams are built around that behavior. Merchandising calendars, inventory planning, and even incentives revolve around volume and sell-through. Removing discounts is strategic, but it's also organizationally very disruptive. At Coach, this required retraining teams to evaluate success differently. They needed to rewrite the roadmap with fewer launches, longer product life cycles, and more patience around adoption curves. They cut back outlet exposure too, and in 2014, the brand announced that they would be closing around 70 stores. The brand exited roughly 250 wholesale locations within department stores like Macy's to protect brand prestige from mass market dilution. Instead of asking how fast something sold, the question then became whether it deserved to exist at full price. When they started putting this strategy into practice, the early results that they saw were very uncomfortable. In 2015, Coach reported its worst sales decline in 7 quarters in North America. Their same-store sales fell by 23%. Analysts at the time were concerned that their turnaround strategy wasn't going to work at all. And the leadership at Coach decided to hold the line. They knew that this was the right strategy, and they had to wait long enough for the new habits to form. That discipline was what became the foundation for everything that followed. Once Coach regained control over how its products were sold, then design could finally lead again. Weavers returned to the Coach archives. He focused on the elements that once made Coach distinctive: heritage leather and strong silhouettes. He focused on details that felt intentional rather than loud, and the branding became quieter. Shape, construction, and feel moved to the foreground. And this is where the modern icons emerged. The Tabby, the Rogue, the Brooklyn. These pieces became anchors designed to evolve over time. When interest slowed, Coach didn't just flood the market with discounts. Instead, they refined the product. The Pillow Tabby softened the design while preserving its identity. It resonated because it felt thoughtful, not reactive. Coach had to relearn how to build products that people actually wanted to keep, not just buy. And at this point, Coach faced a question that many brands avoid answering honestly. They needed to clearly define who their customer was in the face of this turnaround. Coach didn't attempt to compete with the ultra-luxury houses because that customer already had entrenched preferences and far higher price expectations. Coach also chose, though, to not return to chasing bargain or deal-driven shoppers. Instead, the company focused on a specific profile. This was a younger buyer purchasing their first meaningful luxury item, someone who values self-expression and quality while still caring about value. Leadership referred to this customer as timeless Gen Z. This was a consumer who was willing to invest in something that feels personal and lasting. And that clarity was really essential to the brand finding its resonance again. The strategy worked because it aligned with reality. Gen Z is not anti-luxury. They just don't have the wallet size of older generations, but they still want products that signal taste, intention, and identity. What they reject is paying a premium that feels disconnected from meaning. And Coach understood what Gen Z actually wanted, and they doubled down on TikTok, where Gen Z is. And as of today, they have 1.2 million followers on TikTok, which is pretty great for a brand. They also made a brand that felt relevant and cool and spoke directly to Gen Z preferences. And one of Coach's smartest decisions was not forcing the core brand to serve every purpose. In 2023, they launched Coachtopia, which is a separate label built for experimentation. This sub-brand was all about sustainability, circular design, playful silhouettes, and bolder aesthetics. This separation allowed Coach to remain grounded in heritage while giving younger consumers a space that felt native to their values. Both brands could move forward without diluting each other. And Coach didn't buy relevance through oversized celebrity-endorsed campaigns. Instead, the brand placed itself very carefully. Vintage Coach bags appeared organically in pop culture. Celebrity moments felt natural rather than orchestrated. And Coach was all over the charm trend that became big over the past year or so, and of course, their customers loved it too. Retail, which is my favorite part of this Coach turnaround, became very experiential. Coach started having events at their Coach Play stores, and these stores are specifically designed to maximize dwell time. Usually 10 to 15% of a Coach Play store is dedicated to providing some sort of experience for people through a customization station or a coffee shop. And these Play stores also host events events every Friday through Sunday. These events typically feature music, a hospitality element like food from a local cookie company or ice cream vendor, or they'll have craftsmen to customize shoppers' Coach pieces. And then my personal favorite of everything that they're doing with their physical locations, they also created their own Coach coffee shop with a few locations that exist today across New York, New Jersey, and Texas. They knew that Gen Z loves a little coffee and matcha moment, so this was a brilliant brand play. Per the Business of Fashion, they plan to open dozens of these cafes inside retail and outlet stores in the coming years. And over time, the Coach numbers reflected in all of the work that they were doing behind the scenes. The demand in their products increased sharply. 2/3 of new customers in North America became Gen Z and millennials, and Coach climbed fashion rankings and regained cultural credibility. In fiscal year 2025, they actually brought in $5.6 billion. And they are now officially the shining star of their parent company, as they're owned by Tapestry Holdings. The other brand that's in the Tapestry Holdings portfolio is Kate Spade, but Kate Spade has really been struggling lately, so it looks like Kate Spade is going to have to need a turnaround of their own very soon. So here's the lesson that I want you to take away from this. Coach didn't turn itself around by doing more. They succeeded by making better decisions about what to stop doing. They stepped away from constant promotions and narrowed their focus. They chose clarity over volume. Most brands struggle because they try to grow their way out of confusion, but Coach chose discipline first, even when it was uncomfortable. And to me, Coach proved that losing on purpose can actually be the most profitable decision you ever make. And if you stayed with me until the very end of this episode, here is one little surprise to thank you for making it all the way here. I want to share with you that I will be sitting down with the CEO of Coach, Todd Kahn, on this podcast to talk about this turnaround directly. Todd has been CEO of Coach since 2020. He's been with Tapestry since around 2008. He has personally overseen Coach's most explosive growth yet. So if this story resonated with you, that conversation that I have directly with Todd will go even deeper, and I promise you that it is going to be a juicy conversation. And so with that, thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next week. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Social Currency. Before you go, take a second to subscribe to the show wherever you're listening so you never miss an episode. And if you liked what you heard today, please rate and review the podcast. It massively helps the work I do to bring this show to life. And if you have a friend who is as obsessed with business and culture as you are, send this episode to them because sharing the show is one of the best ways to support it. And if you want to keep up with the hottest business lore in real time, follow me on Instagram at Sammi Cohen Talks and subscribe to my newsletter, Social Currency, linked in the show notes. Social Currency is a production of Social Currency Media and Money News Network. The podcast is hosted and executive produced by me, Sammi Cohen, and produced by the Money News Network team. See you next time.